We are lucky to be joined again by Tiffany Allen, who's presented with us a few times. So if you've been on with her before, you know how wonderful she is. If you do not, get excited. This is going to be a great session. Tiffany is the CEO of Boss on a Budget, and which is a small firm that teaches communities to form strong nonprofits and obtain funding. Her passion is working with Black-led nonprofits and other new and community-led organizations, teaching them to use their skills and talents to get funding. She manages an ever-growing online network of 15,000 people from across the world who are seeking grant writing assistance, support, and teaches on nonprofit startups to a combined audience of 32,000 followers on YouTube and Instagram. So if you don't follow Tiffany, be sure to do that. Lots of great content coming your way. And I will stop there. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And Tiffany, I will let you take it away from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you again for having me. Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar. I'm sharing the screen, but I was telling Amanda earlier, it's a new setup for me. So just give me a couple of seconds just to make sure I am good. Can we see the screen okay? Awesome. All right, y'all, let's just jump in. So we're going to talk today about how to share the impact of your work effectively, but I'm really going to focus on how to streamline this work and how to do this when you have limited time and when you have limited resources. And this is actually a replay of a webinar that I did for Bonterra back in August. So we wanted to run it again so that a bigger audience could see this information. So I hope this is going to be helpful for you guys today. So who am I? I'm going to introduce myself really quickly. I have a business called Boss on a Budget, and I help nonprofits launch and grow. So I teach people how to fundraise specifically from the ground up. And I come to this point in my career from multiple perspectives. So I'm actually a social worker. I've worked in the child welfare field for the past 15 years, but the beginning of my career, I was also and am a researcher. So I worked at a notable research nonprofit called Child Trends. If anybody has heard of Child Trends, shout me out in the chat. But I was at Child Trends for 6 years, and I wrote on topics on how to define outcomes, how to develop outcome evaluation. And then also, I call myself a nonprofit activator. So I train nonprofit leaders, specifically focused on mindset, and I just teach people how to scale their nonprofits. So just wanted to give you a little background about like how I come to this. I come at it from many, many different angles. So this is what we're going to cover today. This session is designed for you to take action. I know you signed up for this webinar and you thought you were just going to listen, you're just going to chill out, but I really want you to take notes and think about the things that you can start implementing literally today. And if there's nothing else that you do from this webinar, can you please take at least one thing that you want to implement, okay? Can you promise me that and let me know in the chat if you're willing to do that, okay? But we're going to talk today about how to gather data to share your impact. We're going to talk about how to tell compelling stories, and I'm going to give you time-saving tips for sharing your impact. Now, this is a basic primer. So I'm not going to go like too heavy into some of the topics, but this is a great overview for you. So if you're a small organization or you just don't have a lot of resources or a lot of staff, this is the perfect presentation for you. Okay. So let's start out with this question first. What are your biggest struggles telling your nonprofit stories? I would love to hear from you all. What are the things that you struggle with? So as I'm waiting for you all to put that in the chat, some things that I've heard people say is, well, what we do is important, but I'm not sure how it's compelling to other people. I'm not sure how to communicate that it is compelling and impactful to others. People just kind of don't get it. People don't understand our mission well. Or how can we show impact in a way that really matters to our stakeholders, right? So not enough science, sharing the importance of our mission concisely. What is the most important information to share for different groups? Love it, capacity and prevention. So we're going to cover some of this today. in the training. Thank you guys for sharing that. And I also want you to be open about talking and speaking out loud what you're struggling with, because we got to call out those things so we can address them. All right. So I'm going to break this down really quickly. When I teach, I like to use plain language because I know when people hear the words data, they hear the words outcomes, they get really intimidated. And so my goal here is not to bore you, but it's to energize you, is to make you feel like you finally get it. So I'm going to be using a lot of plain language today, and I'm going to keep it simple. So when I talk about sharing your impact, all I mean is that I'm just sharing your story. So what happens as a result of the good work that you do, right? And how can you communicate that to others? I also want to let you guys know, when you're sharing your impact, there's rich data that you already have, but needs to be packaged. And the reason why I'm saying that is because sometimes people will say, well, we don't know what to share, or we don't really collect data, or we don't know how we're making an impact. But each one of you do have data, whether you're collecting it or not. There are opportunities for you to collect data, and I'm going to share some of that today. And your role is to frame the data in a way that resonates with your audiences. So when you present your data, it should be used to energize. It should be used to excite your donors and your funders and your stakeholders. But I want to keep in mind that you frame that. And we're going to talk about that in the important mindsets. But a lot of times people, they feel like, well, the data are the data. Like, how are numbers going to energize anybody? It's just sharing, communicating what we have. But another important piece of this training is you get to frame how that information is received, right? So we're going to talk about how to do that. In order to consume this information, you have to acknowledge that there are certain beliefs or mindsets that are holding you back. Whether you want to admit it or not, I'm all about busting those limiting beliefs, because I want you to come from a place of confidence and authority. A lot of times when I talk to small and new nonprofits, you're intimidated by the established organizations, you're intimidated by what you believe your donors and funders want from you, and you believe you're not sure if you're communicating it well. And so we often come from that place of, well, are we ever going to be enough? Or are we ever going to have what we need to share our impact, or for people to believe we're just as important as those other organizations? And there are things and beliefs that bubble up inside of you that kind of reinforce those thoughts. And so I don't want us to start there. I want us to start from a place of confidence, right? So these are the things I want you to embody. I want you to think about as you listen to this training today. Are you going to promise me you can do that? Let me know in the chat, please. So this is the first thing. You control how to frame and message your story. You control that. Now, you may not be able to control how people perceive it or what happens once it leaves your organization, but you still control how to frame and message your story. Sometimes the motivation for like sharing your impact is what, oh, our funders just want to hear this, right? I hear people say, well, this is what our funders are interested in, so this is what we report, or this is the kind of data that we collect. And I want to remind you that you can control and decide what you believe is important, and you can help drive that narrative about the good work of your organization. And it can still preserve your client's dignity, and it can still be done in an equitable way. The second thing is, there is a compelling story for everyone. Everyone's nonprofit was started to address a problem, not create, to address a problem. And it's really important to drill down to the specific people or things you impact, and to talk about the result of that impact and how it improves or makes something better. Now, for some of you, it may take more time and more strategizing to figure out how to make it more compelling. But I believe that everyone has a compelling story to share. Otherwise, why else are you here? Otherwise, why is your nonprofit even in existence? And the last thing is, your stakeholders need and they want to hear from you. So it's really not to your advantage to hold back. And you let me know if you've seen this or you feel this, right? Sometimes people are like, I don't want to share our story because well, it doesn't matter. Or I hear people say this about social media. Well, I'm intimidated by the tools on social media, so I'm not sure how to communicate what we do. So I'm not going to share anything. So you just share updates or you share events, but you're not really sharing the stories of your participants or the story of your organization or educating on the importance of your work. If you are holding back in those ways, it's really not to your advantage to do that. People want to hear from you. It is to your advantage to be bold about sharing your impact. You're not just sharing what you're doing, your activities, but you're sharing the change and the transformation that is happening as a result of your work. And you can't be timid about that, especially in this environment, and especially when you're a small organization or you're a new organization. So if you felt that one, that last one right there, I want you to put in the chat bold. Put the word bold. I want you to be bold about sharing the work that you do. Okay. So I know it took a little time on that slide, but I get a little excited. So I just had to share that. So this is what we're going to talk about. There are three elements that we're going to focus on to report your organization's impact. It's defining outcomes and key metrics, it's collecting data, and then finally reporting that data. And I'm going to break this down in subsequent slides, okay? So let's talk about defining outcomes and your key metrics. When I say the word outcomes, I just mean a change in a behavior, a skill, knowledge, perspective, right? It's a change that your organization is tracking or you want to improve or impact. The metrics, when I use that word, I just mean they're the measures that you're using to determine if the outcome was achieved or not. So you're using that to determine whether or not the outcome shifted or it changed in any way. And the one thing I want you to remember again, you need to lead this process. So the development of your outcomes for all of your programs should not be done just to satisfy someone else's need. It should not be done just to satisfy your funder. This process is really, really important for your organization's functioning, okay? I saw a comment in the chat about, well, how do I know what to say to different audiences? I want you to think about when you're developing your outcomes, the audience you want to communicate your message to, because it may be different, right? So you may be measuring different outcomes for different reasons. So some of your audiences may be grant funders, or there may be individuals that are major funders, or just smaller donors, or lawmakers. So you understanding who your key audiences are help to frame your data reporting, but it's really important to consider the types of things that resonate with each of them and understand what they care about, and to do that early when you're defining your outcomes. I hope this makes sense. So I want you to write out who those audiences are, and I want you to identify the outcomes that they're interested in seeing. And make sure that there's alignment with your values, though, and your purpose, right? You don't want to just measure things just because, right? But it also has to be aligned with where you believe your organization has the most impact, or where you believe that you are creating a change or transformation. So ask yourself, what are the important outcomes that a person or organization has signaled that they care about when it comes to your audience? It could be mental health. It could be preserving the city's culture. It could be voting. And ask yourself, well, why does this kind of thing matter to this particular audience? Another thing I'm going to say is that listening is really, really important when you're developing your outcomes. You need to research your stakeholders, listen to what they have to say so you can get clues into what they care about. You can also just ask them, right? Why does this work matter? I love the practice of interviewing people or just chatting with people to get their perspective. You can do this with funders. You can do this with donors. I would not be afraid of reaching out to them. So ask them questions like, why does this work matter? What would happen if this organization didn't exist or we did not address this problem? How would you describe the impact of this organization to someone else? And you can ask questions like that, and it will give you clues to the type of outcomes that are important to communicate, because that's what your audiences have signaled that they care about. You can also research other examples of work that other people have done and how other people have defined outcomes in your same industry as well to compare and see that you're capturing everything that's important in your particular field. I think two of the most overlooked but important stakeholders are clients or your participants and staff. I believe that we don't ask clients and participants and staff or volunteers enough about what they think about the organization, what they believe the impact is. And I also believe that when you ask those questions, you're going to get really, really powerful information. So I want you to think about also how can you talk to your clients or talk to your staff and get their feedback too. Okay. I want to make sure that you may not have I want to note that you may not have a designated person to collect outcomes and track data. So even if you don't have that kind of staff person, a program director can do this, an administrative staff person can do this. If you're the only staff person and you're the executive director, you can do this. If you're a working board and you're a new organization, your board should be on board with helping to get this information as well, okay? So here are some key questions you need to ask yourself when you are developing your outcomes. What does success look like for our clients or the things or people we serve? You can also ask yourself, based on the type of research I mentioned, you can do that based on the research that I mentioned in the last slide. I want you to think of short and long-term outcomes. You could also ask yourself, what does success look like for the organization? Because a part of this impact conversation is how is your organization able to influence that impact? You don't want to just include client outcomes when you're developing this, but I want you to think about what does healthy functioning look like for your organization? Is it a healthy functioning board? Is it that you've retained staff? Is it that you have a strong leadership team? And it really does undergird the success of your organization when you identify what also contributes to that success. Those are still important outcomes or goals too, the healthy functioning of your organization, because you cannot reach certain outcomes if the organization isn't healthy. And that's still a part of your story. Now, traditionally in research, people don't talk about that. They talk more about client outcomes and they don't really talk about how the organization's functioning can help contribute to that. You don't hear that a lot. People focus more on client outcomes. But I want you to think about in communicating your impact, why something like that would be important to a donor or be important to a funder, because they need to hear that kind of stuff too about the healthy functioning of your organization. This is an example. Say you were an organization that were around when COVID hit, right? And you can say, we maintained 85% of our staff, which is a really important metric for our organization. And that ensured that our clients got consistent services. They were able to achieve their goals because we maintained our staff. That is important to know. That is important for your donors and your funders to know. And it's not necessarily a client outcome, but it's an organizational outcome or organizational goal that was really important to help maintain your success. Okay? You also want to make sure when you're developing your outcomes that they're smart. And I know a lot of you guys have heard that. Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound, right? And we don't have a lot of time to go into this, but you can also look up SMART goals in Google because there's a lot of information on that. But you just want to make sure you're using that as a way, as a framework for developing your outcomes, right? So also want you to think about, are your outcomes relevant? Sometimes I see people collecting data just because somebody else is collecting it, so they feel like it's a good idea. Or their funder may suggest it and they're collecting it, but it doesn't really capture the essence of what they do. So I want you to make sure that whatever you select as an outcome is relevant to the work that you're doing, right? If you have a music program, but you have outcomes related to civic participation, something really random, right? They don't go together, but because you saw somebody else collecting it, you thought, oh, let me capture that too. That actually is a time waster. And I want you to focus on the things that are almost relevant, okay? That are relevant for your organization. So here's some time savers for developing your outcomes. Because you might be thinking, Tiffany, okay, this sounds like a lot of work. But first of all, I want to acknowledge that doing this early will save you time later. So building the development of your outcomes when you're designing your programs, when you're starting your organization, saves you time. And doing this type of work isn't just for a data person. So I don't want you to just pass this off and say, I'm not good at data, so I can't really do that. Outcomes, I'm not an expert at this. Why would I develop outcomes? But essentially, you're just tracking what does success look like for your organization? How are people, how are their lives improved? What changes? And everyone can capture that kind of stuff. Program staff can contribute to that, marketing staff, fundraising staff, okay? So, as I said before, start early. Can somebody put early in the chat? Because I've been there where you're designing a program and you only develop outcomes when you're filling out an application for grant funding. So, I just want to be real on this webinar. I know that happens. You're trying to get funding for a program, the funder asks about outcomes, and you're like, oh, snap, let me write something down real quick. And you haven't even thought about that in the design of your program. So, as much as you can, as you're thinking about the design, also think about the outcomes and the data you need to collect for that, okay? That's a part of your planning process. One of the major tasks of your organization is to be able to communicate why people should care, because that directly connects to fundraising. So if you can measure your outcomes early, it'll prevent you from scrambling later, and you'll be in a stronger position to make that case because this is what success looks like for our organization. Okay. I also want you to have a system. Can somebody say a system? System save me, right? Because when I know, and what I mean by system is just the same set of processes you're going to use when something happens. That's all I mean when I say a system. So I'm borrowing from the continuous quality improvement process, CQI. Just have a system where you do certain things in the year and it's just known in your organization. This is when we're going to do this. This is when we're going to track this information, right? So set a time in a year where you're either defining or assessing your outcomes. We're going to look at our outcomes and make sure they're still capturing what we think they should be capturing. There should be set times in your year where you're collecting data. When is that? Who's responsible for that? Put that in a process. Have a system for that. There's a time where you're going to review and analyze the data. So maybe at the end of the year, that's your time where you're going to look back and see what you've collected, clean the data, pull it for reports. Then there are times you're going to report the data. Maybe there's a grant report that's due. Maybe you're creating an annual report for your organization. Well, there's some things you can put in timelines, right? So set times in the years that you typically do this kind of stuff. Think about your budgeting process. How can you, looking at your outcomes or the program success or your program functioning, impact how you're going to budget for the next year? So you may want to align it with that as well. Also, for data collection, have staff complete things at certain time points. Build it into their processes. It's a part of their work. It's nothing separate. Collecting data or looking at outcomes is not separate. So identify who, when, and how. Who, when, and how for each of those tasks, okay? So I know that was a lot. Number one, honestly, was the most. The rest of these won't be as much. But I want to ask you, how are you going to execute based on some of the things you've heard me say already? And you can put it in the chat or you don't have to, but I do encourage you to at least write it down because I find that when I write things down and then when I speak them, I'm way more likely to remember those things and to implement. And my goal is that you take something and implement this for your organization. So I want you to think about in terms of developing outcomes, in terms of developing, a metric for for the different outcomes. What are you going to do? What's one takeaway? All right. Second, can somebody put number 2 in the chat? As you can tell, I like interacting with the chat, even though I can't see all the comments in real time. There will be time for question and answers, but I just want to make sure you're here. I want to make sure you're with me, okay? So put number 2 in the chat. So we're going to talk about collecting data. And I'm going to say this again. data is not just for your stakeholders. It's not just for your funders. It's for you, right? So I know by now I've said this over and over again, but I really want you to get this. Data are really there. To me, it's like a mirror. It helps you see what exists. And sometimes we don't want to look in the mirror. Sometimes we look a mess and we don't want to see what is. But until we acknowledge what is, we can't change or make it better or celebrate how we're doing great things. So I don't want you to shy away from data, and I want you to take control of this process. This can be really meaningful to look at your data and motivate you and inspire you. It shouldn't scare you. Okay. So here's some pointers on collecting data. I want you to think about quantitative and qualitative data. Okay, so quantitative data, simply put, is just numbers. Qualitative data is more text or narrative that kind of qualify or explain the numbers. I'm using really simplistic definitions, so please forgive me if you're a researcher in the chat. But think about your success in numbers, but also think about the stories behind those numbers. I want you to think about your stakeholders and what they want and they need to hear from you. So if you already know who your audiences are, you know the kind of things that motivate them or the kind of things they're interested in hearing about. Do you have stories that can help them hear that kind of information? I want you to also think about some of the things that are hard to measure, but they could still be powerful if they're heard in the words of your participants. So you may be feeling frustrated because, well, it's hard to capture something. It's hard to put numbers behind something. You can't capture somebody who says, I just feel great. I feel more confident in myself. Yeah, there are some measures where you can track that, but some people aren't doing that. And how can you communicate to a donor? Well, everyone keeps saying they feel more confident after they take our classes. Part of what can help that, part of that could be collecting their quotes and getting the stories, right? To help people see it in a human way. I also want you to think about different methods to collect information. Think about surveys, think about focus groups, interviews, observation, polls, collect images, collect artifacts. All of that, they're all data. An image that's drawn by a participant can tell a story in itself, even if you don't give it any words. An image can tell a powerful story. So there are so many different types of data that you could be collecting that you might already have that can help communicate your story in a way, a more effective way, or can help communicate the numbers or add context to your numbers. I want you to be creative, especially when it comes to reporting, because that's going to be the next one. Because it's not just about hearing the numbers, right? When people want to support you, a lot of times that's an emotional decision, especially when it comes to individual donors. People want to feel like they're helping something or they're helping an individual or helping their neighbor, and showing the images of their neighbors, creating compelling stories can help move people in an emotional way that numbers can't do, right? So here's some time savers for collecting data. Use automation to collect data, right? So here's an example of an automation. After somebody receives a service, send a text or send an email and then ask them to fill in information. Because we know that once a client leaves your building, if you have an office space, out of sight, out of mind, and you may want to collect some information from them. So text them and ask them to click a link to fill in some information or to fill in your survey, and just have that automation already built in so you don't have to think about it. There are services like Zapier, Zapier, Zapier. What is Zapier? If anyone has heard of it, please enlighten your friends in the chat, but I can explain it as well. What it does is it connects two different softwares that normally don't speak to each other, and it helps them connect. So you have a trigger, and then this software over here will do this, and it'll compel the software to do that. Here's a very plain example. Somebody donates to you, and you get that donation, you get a trigger that somebody donated, and in your email marketing system, Zapier can connect to that email marketing system and say, hey, send this personalized email in 10 minutes. And Zapier will do that for you if the services you're using are connected to Zapier, and many are, okay? You could also use AI. I saw somebody had AI on in the chat today. They have note-taking features. Some of these note-taking features, y'all, are amazing, okay? So you can use those features to summarize your focus group and interview conversations, whereas before, back in the day, you gotta get somebody to take notes, you gotta transcribe and look at all the themes. This AI is summarizing the themes for you right now. So if you're in a position where you're like, well, if we do all these interviews or focus groups, what are we going to do with the information? Technology is doing it for you, whether you realize it or not. And so you can leverage it to make life easier for you. The other thing I will say is build data collection into your program work. So collect client stories as just a regular thing. It's just something that you do. It's just a part of your work. Just like doing an intake or doing an assessment with somebody or providing a service or class, build in asking information from your clients in those processes, because those are important data points that are motivating. It could be really, really motivating for your staff. It can be validating for your clients because they're able to tell their stories and to share information. It could be really empowering for your board, for you, to help keep you motivated. So build collecting stories into the process and identify key time points where you want to collect information and just embed it. Okay. So it doesn't have to feel like a chore. I also recommend you have like a shared space, a shared online folder where people can access and just dump in vignettes or videos, data reports, stories, the things that you collect, where everybody knows this is where we can get some information. So you're not always scrambling when it's time to use this information. And this is really helpful for your grant writers when they need to pull quotes or pull data or get information, and it's so hard hounding down the people who are doing the work. You can have a shared space where you gather that information. Okay. So my question to you is, how will you execute when it comes to collecting data? What are some things you're going to consider doing and implementing when you get off of this webinar? Again, I really recommend that you you write it down, and you say it out loud, because that makes it real when you say it out loud. And thank you for those who are saying that in the chat as well. All right, last one. Can you put number 3 in the chat for me? Because we are at number 3, and it's about reporting data. So here are a couple of things. Data visualizations are a powerful way to grab your stakeholders' attention, okay? So use colors, use sizing to show impact and to emphasize data points. Insert quotes around your data points so that it can provide that context and put a real feel behind your data, right? If you're not using a system like a service like Canva, Canva, whenever I talk, I feel like most people know about Canva, but I just like to say it in case somebody doesn't. But you have templates where you can design reports, anything, honestly, anything related to design you can do in Canva. And nonprofits have a free professional account with Canva. So you could use that and use colors and design something really, really impactful using that free service. I also want to remind you, when you're reporting information, your job is not to overwhelm them. Sometimes we feel like we feel smarter or we sound smarter when we just hit them with everything. I'm going to say everything, every single thing we do good, everything in the whole year that we did, I'm going to put on this one 8x11 page. And when you overwhelm, people get confused. And when you confuse people, they become disengaged. So simplify whatever you're reporting. Less is better. I want you to think about the highlights from the data that you collect. If you have a 20-page or 20-question survey, what are the high points from that survey, or what are the main themes from what you saw in that survey that you believe your audience would care most about? So one example is you have a set of questions that use a Likert scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree, right? And 75% of people on one particular question agreed, 10% disagreed, 15% strongly disagreed. You don't need to show me all of that. You just need to tell me 75% of people agreed because that's what matters most. Or maybe it's important to show that 15% strongly disagreed, and that's the major finding and the major point. Whatever is the major point, highlight that. Okay. Use one-liners or headers to preview your data, to tell the story behind the data, to help explain your findings. I want you to think about using different formats. Use infographics, use video. I really implore you to use video to talk about your work, to share your impact. It does not have to be complicated. It does not have to be, produced by an award-winning producer. You can literally get on your phone and share information. Anyone can do that. Use social media posts, right? Use what makes the most sense for your audience, but also helps leverage your skills and saves you time, right? So I love talking about social media, even though most people don't want to, acknowledge that social media is powerful and that they have to get on it because most people don't like being on there. But social media is a great way to share impact because you can do it in so many different ways and you can reach so many different people. So I just really want you to consider social media, okay? Involve your staff. So when you have good news or you have information to share, get your marketing staff involved. If you have marketing staff, get your program staff involved, celebrate with them, get your fundraising and your development staff, get everybody in the same room to talk about your successes. Them being together can be really, really powerful. Okay. And then I want you to use storytelling to show your impact. I'm going to break that down in this slide. Okay. And then we can stop and ask questions. So here's the thing about data. It needs to be framed. It needs context. It needs explanation. So you want to guide the messaging around your data. You don't want to just put numbers out there, put information out there. You message that data. That's your job. That's what you have control of, right? That's what we talked about in the beginning. And you can do that within the context of a story. So it's one thing to just collect the data, but you got to move and motivate somebody. So before we get to the formula though, I want you to always consider your audience, which is why we talked about the audience early on. I want you to think about who is receiving the message and what matters to them, because who is in front of you may change how you frame that message. A grant funder is going to be interested in different things than an individual who may be giving $50 versus that funder who's giving you $50,000. And what they want to hear from you and what matters most to them shifts. Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's different. So just acknowledge that, okay? So if you know what matters to them, if you know what pisses them off, what energizes them, then you know what to focus on in your storytelling, right? So I'm going to give an example and I'm going to walk through the example with the storytelling framework. I'm going to use this is what I used in the last training. I thought it was important to use this because some people don't think they have compelling missions. So you're a local park association, okay? And one of your audiences is your lawmakers. So you're trying to communicate to your lawmakers whatever you need them to do, however you need them to act. I want you to first think about, okay, what do lawmakers care about? What matters to them, right? One of the things that matter to them is that their constituents are happy or satisfied, because if they're not, they're going to get those phone calls. So what motivates them a lot is what the experiences of their constituents. So something that might be compelling to a lawmaker would be you're bringing back life to the neighborhood, or you're inspiring businesses to invest in the neighborhood because you're beautifying the area. People have places to shop. People have reasons to come to the area. You're just bringing up the value of the neighborhood in general, and you're becoming now the heart heartbeat of the neighborhood just by beautifying a space, right? So this is the formula I would use to tell that story. So first thing is a hook. Can somebody say a hook in the chat? It's something that grabs you. It can be a compelling headline. You can also use color or imagery to stop people in their tracks. It's the thing that gets people to say, wait a minute, I'm going to pay attention to this, right? So your hook could be, and I'm bringing this down to an individual story, David. David was afraid to walk down the street at night. So you want to know, well, what was going on with the street? Why was he afraid? What's going on with David? The next step is outline the problem. So you're going to break that problem down. What's the reason the program or your organization needs to exist, right? What is the concern that caused your organization to address this problem or have this service, right? So it could be that because the parks weren't being addressed, it was attracting the wrong type of crowd, right? He didn't have a safe place to play, right? So David is a child. He didn't have a safe place to play because people were congregating, doing bad activities in the park. Everybody kind of was ignoring these spaces. So the next step is the solution, right? So how is your programming or your activities directly addressing the problem you laid out? What is the solution that your activities are presenting? Well, we worked with the community to design a park that caters to the community's needs, and we work together to clean up the park. That's the solution that our organization did, right? Then we go to the impact. Well, what changed as a result of that solution? What are the outcomes that were changed, or what was made better or different based on what you did in that solution? The community now has a place to gather. Now people can come together. You're inspiring connections. You're building the community fabric. Jerome and his friends now, excuse me, not Jerome, David. I don't even know where Jerome came from. David is now a regular. He invites his friends. They even started a football league because they feel safe. They can congregate there. People are coming outside and building connections now. The next step is the call to action. Now that you laid out that story and you presented your organization as a solution to help present that impact, how can that person help you maintain that or scale up? So how can we maintain that space for David? When you give or when you do this call to action, when you volunteer or whatever, you will ensure this happens. If the call to action to the lawmakers is to pass a law or provide more funding, well, there are 3 more parks in the neighborhood that need beautifying. And when you support us or help us get funding for this, we can do even more. So that was just a really quick way of outlining how to develop a story and to place your organization in that story so that people feel compelled to work with you and help you. So when we talk about the solution and when we talk about the resulting impact, that's where you can insert your impact and the work you've done with the outcomes that we talked about and all of that in this slide, okay? So I'm gonna make sure we have time for questions. Just really quickly, some time-saving tips. I wanted to give you a generic example because sometimes people feel like, well, I'm not saving the world or I'm not doing, really compelling work. But even the work of a local park, when you drill down to individual stories, it can really, really make a difference for people and see the importance of what you're doing. So one time saving tip, use visualization tools built into softwares that you have access to. Social Solutions has products it's part of Bonterra. They have products that you can use to visualize your data, pull up reports and things like that. I want you to lean in. Somebody say lean in. Don't lean back. Lean in to AI, artificial intelligence, because honestly, y'all, it's not going anywhere. And this is not the time to be afraid. So AI can help you develop hooks for your stories. It can help you develop a compelling message, taglines to grab people, subject lines for emails. You can create video snippets using AI. If you have longer stories and you want longer videos and you want to kind of break that down, you can use when you do Zoom interviews, you can use AI to pull out the highlights and the major points, because it can summarize that for you actually. And you can use the AI's examples to summarize what the major points are to make things go faster. And I already talked about Canva, but just use tools like that to design compelling and straightforward graphics. All of these softwares now that you all are engaged with have some kind of AI component. So even Canva, you can put in ideas and it can create images based on the text you put. So they're literally creating images off what you put. There are less limitations now, right? There's less limitations. So how you execute, just let me know. How are you going to execute reporting your data? How are you going to use storytelling more? How are you going to use hooks more? Just try to find one thing that you're going to do to implement to share your data. All right. I'm just reading the chat. You had me genuinely concerned and excited for this fictitious guy, David.
And Jerome.
And Jerome. But that, I'll stop here for questions because I know there probably were questions as I was talking.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tiffany. Before we jump into questions, anybody who wants additional resources from Tiffany after today's session, let us know so that she can connect with you. As you can tell, Tiffany is a wealth of knowledge with so much to share, not just in today's session, but in her network and all of those great platforms. So let us know if you want to connect with Tiffany. I'll leave that up for a moment here while we get to some questions. Feel free to drop them in the Q&A if you have any final ones that come up. But thank you so much, Tiffany. This was awesome. I saw lots of things in the chat as we were going, both in terms of engagement and just people feeling heard and seen. So thank you for seeing our audience and speaking to folks so effectively. The first question that came in earlier in today's presentation was from Olivia, who had said, do you have any advice for organizations where the individuals that develop the program outcomes are different from those that are asked to report the impact?
My biggest piece of advice is to bring everyone together early. So have a discussion and have a meeting to talk about how you're designing a program and what's important to them. And you can ask them as well, so they can be a part of those people that you ask for insight on developing your outcomes, but bring them in super, super early so they understand your thought processes, they understand where you're going with this. So when it's time to report the information, there's a connection there and they get it. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's great. Another question that came in about reporting. So some folks wondering if they should rely on data or if just a narrative would be enough. So I think this is referring to you talking about that qualitative and quantitative data. Should they be separate or should they all be, together in some form?
That's a great question. So I really do think it depends on the audience. So for example, a grant funder, when you're writing a grant proposal, you should heavily rely on data and research, not just on your own data, but also what does research say about your problem, any information you have on demographics of who you serve. Grant proposals, especially those more comprehensive ones, need to have that kind of information, but you can also spice up the narrative by including quotes and including stories. So one way you can look at it is, what's the primary information the audience needs to hear from me, and how can I use other information to help provide context or provide, for lack of better words, to spice it up. Sorry, y'all, I'm not really eloquent today. But on the other hand, you may have like a fundraising appeal. You're doing something for Giving Tuesday. I would not recommend that you, on your fundraising appeal page, just put data, because that doesn't move people. But you would absolutely start with a compelling story or compelling quote or share a really meaningful picture. So really put yourself in the seat of the audience and ask yourself, what would move them to pay attention to me to want to learn more? Because you're trying to hook them. And then from there, it can help you design how you frame that ask.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Tiffany. I saw somebody in the chat just asked where they can learn more about the Bonterra platform. So I just want to throw out a quick poll if that is something you're interested in learning about, how our tools kind of help integrate some of these practices that Tiffany shared. I'll leave that up so that we can get to the next question. But Anthony and I wanted to get to that. And anybody else who might be interested, feel free to fill out that poll. We'll chat with you and can share a little bit more about how those work. A similar question to tools, Tiffany, for you. This one came from Andrea, who had said, you suggested having a shared space where staff can share stories, those vignettes that you talked about. And so Andrea asked if you had a recommended platform or place to do this for them and their staff.
I don't have one that I recommend, but I can just say what I have used. I've used Google Drive. I know some people do Microsoft, so they may have OneDrive. Or you may have like a system in your organization like Bandcamp. I don't know if that's the right name, but whatever you're using for your document management system could work just fine. And then you may also think about like important ways to share that information. So some of your staff may not go to those folders, but they'll send you something. So maybe you can use Slack as a way for you to send messages to each other, and then someone be responsible for saving it in a folder or something like that. So it just really depends.
Yeah. I saw some people in the chat saying that they're using SharePoint as well if they have Microsoft Teams. That's another thing that's available to them. Another clarifying question came in around AI, and somebody had asked, kind of what you most recommend using that for. And then is there anywhere that you would go for maybe an intro to that for folks who are kind of just starting to dabble?
Let me just say this, I am not an AI expert, but there's so much information about it right now. Mallory Erickson is a consultant. I think she just did a conference on AI specifically for nonprofits. So I'll check out the information she has on that. And honestly, you could probably just go to YouTube and see all kinds of information on AI because it's a hot topic right now. I mean, generally, when people talk about AI, they talk about Chat GPT. That's not the only resource, but I mean, that's one place to start where you can just practice writing prompts and just see what it can do. And just ask it questions and see how it responds to you. But also pay attention to the services you use. Like I said with Canva, you may not realize it, but they all have AI attached, and just start playing around with them too.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually just did that with an email like last week for the first time. It's wild. It was crazy. Definitely lean in. I was a lean away, but there's some good that you can lean into for sure. That's great. I think we probably have time for maybe one or two more questions if folks want to plop any more in. I saw one left in the Q&A just about where to find reliable data. I don't know if there's any more clarification on that, but for example, demographics, I don't know if you have any advice on that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most reliable sources is the Census Bureau, just for general demographic information in the US, at least. And I would also think about your industry because, first of all, government agencies, federal government agencies, all are responsible for collecting data. So they generally have like information on their website on what they collect. So like the Department of Education or the Department of Justice, all those big agencies have access to data, and those tends to be reliable because states have to submit that, the information is cleaned and reported and all that kind of stuff. So start there, but also think about your local universities too. They generally have like centers based on whatever field they're interested in or industry they're in, and they produce data as well. Look into your state government agencies, they present data and all that kind of stuff. So start there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tiffany. As always, so much covered in a 1 hour time slot. And I know there were a ton of actionable tips that came out of today. So I hope y'all take Tiffany's advice. Take those 3 pieces that you wrote down throughout the presentation and really run with that. Folks, appreciate all of your engagement with us and with Tiffany here today. And definitely encourage you to follow Boss on a Budget and all of Tiffany's platforms and YouTube and Instagram to get so much more of this knowledge. This is just a very small piece of what she's capable of, and really appreciate you taking the time to share that with us today, Tiffany. This was really helpful information. I hope you can see the chat running with praises and thank yous. So really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you here today. Hope to see you at our next webinar. We'll be doing another session at the end of this month. So keep an eye on your email for an invitation to that. We'll be excited to see you there and do a little bit more of a deep dive into some of these things and into Bonterra's tools. So we'll see you there. Tiffany, always a pleasure. Hope to see you back as per always. Thank you so much. All right. Take care, everyone.